Hello, folks. Hello. Welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, Phil McKenzie. And we are going to talk to you today about a couple of different things. First of all, we had a lovely weekend off last weekend, didn't we? Yeah?
It was great.
It was great. And full disclosure, we're recording this in advance, so if either Phil or I die, if one of us perishes over the weekend, then enjoy this, the last time you'll ever hear from us together. So what we're doing here is talking about the next upcoming card. After that weekend off, we're looking ahead now to Alexander Gustafsson versus Anthony Smith and two other light heavyweight fights worthy of your adoration and excitement. Those are Volkan Oezdemir versus Ilir Latifi and Jimmie Manuwa versus Alexander Rakic. Pretty interesting lineup there. Lots of implications for the future of the 205-pound division. But what we're really looking forward to, and I know I'm not surprising any of you listening by saying this, is the card that comes after that. UFC 238 is absolutely fire. From top to bottom, we start off with, granted, it's one of those cards, this is another weird new trend in the modern UFC where, unlike most of the cards we've seen recently, this is not top heavy. This card is fully stacked from top to bottom, but the top two fights are like the most asterisk ridden and weirdest of them. We've got Henry Cejudo and Marlon Moraes, and then Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica. And we're going to get to talking about those and some of the other big fights next week. But since there's so much on this card to cover, we thought we'd also do a little preview a week ahead and cross our fingers and pray to God that nothing gets canceled and no one gets injured.
Yeah, there are legit about 7 fights on that card, which could main event a fight night.
Yes, absolutely. And we have very deliberately chosen, I think, not to cover one of those fights, Tony Ferguson versus Donald Cerrone, until next week, because next week it may no longer be here. There's a very good chance of that. So this week, at the end of today's episode, we are going to be looking forward to, Aljamain Sterling versus Pedro Munhoz. Huge bantamweight fight there. Very exciting matchup. And a great featherweight fight. Ricardo Lamas versus Calvin Kattar. Super hyped about both of those. And again, there's so much more in this card to talk about. Very much looking forward to next week's episode, when we can cover the rest of this this lineup. But as I said, Phil, Alexander Gustafsson, Anthony Smith, we start with the people who are kind of boxery. Is that apt?
They do like to punch people, yes.
I think I was trying to condemn their skill sets and sneakily imply that they only succeed because they're fighting at 205 pounds, and then my brain just melted. So please take it away.
Okay, so a lot of what we have here is a kind of a bit of the old McGregor and Iaquinta versus Khabib narrative, which we're looking at this one. Both of these guys having come off shutout losses to the champion in John Jones, and one of them had some success and then just got finished, and the other one made a Pyrrhic victory by surviving all 5 rounds in which he did almost nothing. Mm-hmm.
Pointedly refusing to be illegally finished.
Yeah. His main claim to fame. And so it's an interesting kind of crossroads fight, because I think one of these guys is going to drop out of what is considered to be the light heavyweight, and I say this with heavy inverted commas, elite.
Oh. We call those apostrophes here in the civilized world, Phil. Inverted commas.
Oh, go fuck yourself.
Oh, you guys couldn't think of a better word for that? Inverted commas? God damn it.
That's what they are.
This is my problem.
That's what Germans would call them.
This is my problem.
And they
with
would call it in one word.
Yes. Short story. When I was in Germany, they in high school for an exchange program, they did a public event for the European Cup soccer games. And they borrowed an English phrase, but in a very particularly German way where they didn't understand how bizarre it would sound to our ears. for a few years, the official German word for that type of event was Das Public Viewing, which always tickled me. Now it's Sportskino, which is much better. Hold on, Phil. I just want to say, all right, you people invented this language. You don't know what to do with it. All of your phrases are overladen. You're not efficient. And why do all of your cookies have names that sound like medicine?
Give me an example.
Digestive biscuits? What the fuck? Why
what
would
if
that...
you need to digest things?
Why would you call a cookie that? Do you people know how to market anything?
It's not a cookie, it's a biscuit.
Why does all of your food sound like medicinal products? Bovril?
You don't want to make it sound delicious. Then people will keep trying to buy it and eat it, and then they'll get fat. You want to make it sound as repulsive as possible.
That's how you stay so healthy and thin. No one wants to taste mushy fucking peas.
Yeah, first you fuck up the teeth so that you make it difficult to eat, and then you make sure everything sounds like it was made 150 years ago, because let's be honest, it probably was. And then you have a indentured class system which just keeps people down, and then you have a healthy healthy country full of poor people.
Phil, the original Oreo cookie is called a Hydrox.
Ugh.
That is that's an HIV medication. That is not the name of a cookie.
Yeah, you've kind of destroyed your own point better than I could.
What? That's a British brand.
Was it?
Yeah, sort yourselves out.
Hydrox?
Yeah. You name all your shit that.
It does sound like what we do.
Bovril, Vegemite. Come on. Name these things like they're foods. All right. Okay.
I refuse.
With that important topic out of the way, what the hell were we saying? Gustafsson?
We were talking about Gustafsson Smith and how this is a fight where both of these guys are weirdly similar in some ways.
Yes.
I mean, because we're talking two long, gangly, durable, with caveats, I would say now. Because both of these guys have kind of come to durability from opposite directions. Gus has come to it from being incredibly unhurtable and having just an adamantium chin, which has just been eroded by a lack of confidence over time.
Yeah.
Whereas Anthony Smith has come to it from being someone who just panicked himself into finishes constantly for the first 10 years of his career, and has kind of come to being a tough, difficult guy to put away relatively late. So they seem to have kind of come to a very similar place.
But both guys, that's an interesting point. Both guys have good chins to this day. But yeah, Gustafsson, ever since Rumble knocked him out, has been carrying the weight of that knockout on his shoulder in every fight. He seems to, now that he's aware that he can be knocked out, he has ever since seemed especially cautious and a little more breakable mentally, because he knows he can be broken physically. And yeah, that used to be Lionheart's problem, and now it isn't, which is a great advertisement for nominative determinism. Call yourself Lionheart, and eventually you will become one. And I think this might be, in a lot of other ways besides that, sort of a weird, a parody fight, if you know what I mean. Not in the sense of, a parody of good fighting, but that will show us some parity between these two fighters, where I think a lot of people are still will be coming into this thinking, well, Alexander Gustafsson, title contention, title level elite. Anthony Smith, had a great run through light heavyweight, but now we've seen, he really can't hang. And in reality, this might be one of those matchups where if Gustafsson wins it, it really comes down to, his ability to wrestle and control top position. Because otherwise, this is Anthony Smith is a long, tall fighter who's durable, who has some counter-punching ability, who has some footwork and a jab when he, thinks about using them. He has a lot of the tools to genuinely trouble a fighter like Gustafsson, who, as we remember very well, was getting absolutely pieced up by Jan Blachowicz before taking him down and beating him up on the ground.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a fair characterization. I mean, I would describe Smith is probably a slightly more diverse striker. He's a bit more of a willing kicker. But yeah, both of these guys are defensively not really there. Offensively, very dangerous. So I think, I think we're just in for a really strange fight. I find it very hard to exactly predict how this one is going to go. Because one of the things about that Jones fight is that he didn't really have a great time taking Anthony Smith down. And admittedly, this did seem because Anthony Smith was very heavily focused on not being taken down, and so just kind of got kicked to death. But it wasn't. It was definitely a lot harder for him in the clinch than I actually thought it was going to be.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think a lot of that really had to do with the passivity of Smith. Like, even when he was in positions on the ground, he chose that he would rather sit on his butt and cover up for like minutes at a time than scramble back to the feet, knowing he would expose himself to some nasty shots.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I do have to pick Gustafsson just because he has shown more of ability to stick to a pace, I've never really seen him do anything like I saw from Anthony Smith in that last fight, where he just stopped fighting. I've seen Anthony Smith break more times. I think, like you said, Gustafsson has more of a advantage in one particular area in the top position wrestling. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked to see Anthony Smith take Gus down, but I don't think it's a particularly consistent way of him getting to him.
I would be kind of surprised, to be honest. One thing that has never really been in doubt about Alexander Gustafsson is his takedown defense. And I think you can probably explain the easy reactive doubles Jones started to hit on him. Probably had something to do with the, as he described it, the scratched and cracked grapefruit-sized contusion inside his groin that he received in the first round. So something seemed compromised with his ability to defend those takedowns. I don't think Anthony Smith is much of a wrestler. You know, he's...
Yeah, and also just the fact that I don't really trust Anthony Smith's cardio. He still didn't look. He didn't really do anything in the Jones fight and managed to make it 5 rounds, so that's fine. But just when he actually fought at a sort of vaguely Gustafsson level pace against Oezdemir, he just looked absolutely shattered at the end of it.
Yeah, and we've seen Gustafsson tire out, but not any more than you would really expect from a light heavyweight who moves as much as he does. Smith does not have Gustafsson's, he just doesn't have Gustafsson's composure. Even the post-Rumble, Gus has a sort of veteran guile, the ability to sort of manage energy, to fight while tired, a willingness to fight back even when things are going really badly for him. I think Gustafsson still has quite a bit of that. And absolutely the wrestling. I gotta pick Gustafsson here. I until I see Anthony Smith beat this level of light heavyweight, even though I think he is in many ways pretty much right there with Gustafsson technique-wise. I have to pick Gustafsson.
Yeah. Yeah, I just can't really trust Anthony Smith. I mean, he still doesn't have any real meaningful wins, apart from Oezdemir, who actually, and I think we're probably going to talk about this a bit, is looking perfectly okay lately.
Well, do you want to move on to the next fight?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. Well, Volkan Oezdemir, yeah. Well, finish what you were going to say first. Sorry about cutting you off. Smith versus Oezdemir.
No, I mean, I just wanted to say that, in his most recent fight against Dominic Reyes, I was actually reasonably impressed with Volkan Oezdemir. I know it was largely seen as a kind of underperformance from Reyes, but I thought Oezdemir looked far more consistent than he has at pretty much any time in the recent past, or indeed ever. I mean, he really is clearly a gym rat, constantly trying to improve guy. He might not be the most technically adept or athletically overwhelming fighter, but he did show a very good understanding of what he was in that fight, and did a really decent job of fighting a long, tall fighter and going and being a kind of aggressive counterpuncher where he was closing in on Reyes and trying to counter Reyes with multiple shots, and not, as he has in the past, gassing himself out doing so.
Yeah, that was perhaps the most impressive thing, right? Was his ability to take some steam off of his punches. And it seemed like actually early in that fight he was going to go down the same path. But he sort of adjusted and took a little volume off as the fight went on. We saw really nice pressure. We saw, like, in terms of footwork, in terms of feints and setting up those opportunities to land aggressive counters, I thought Oezdemir looked really sharp. And even if I thought that Dominic Reyes definitely deserved a unanimous decision win in that fight, I did not think it was Oezdemir was picking up those later rounds. He did a fantastic job of keeping a consistent volume on a fighter with genuinely good evasive footwork, genuinely good by the standards of the light heavyweight division defense, genuinely good counter punching. He made it really, really difficult. And thank God he's fighting Ilir Latifi next, because he can take all the lessons he learned from fighting that sharp, technical, sound opponent and apply them just right away to Ilir Latifi, who is very much like every other fighter in this division.
Yeah, I mean, and most similar to Dominic Reyes. I feel like
in build,
a long, tall, rangy outfighter. That's Ilir Latifi to a T.
Dominic Reyes is built like Ilir Latifi's horse. Like, they're like completely different species. God, I never know how to pick Latifi fights. Like, what the hell is Ilir Latifi? What's he doing?
I mean, he is one thing which I think. So, I think the interesting thing about the Oezdemir fight is that it showed that fact that it was a split decision and that it was reasonably close. It was competitive.
It was fully competitive all the way through.
Yeah, I didn't really see the argument for an Oezdemir win, but it showed that he can win decisions against people, and he hasn't shown that in his career thus far. And, or at least, not since that diabolical fight against OSP where I don't think he won it. But it showed that he can win decisions against like decent opposition. I do not trust Ilir Latifi to win decisions. He is just not built to do it.
Yeah.
Like physically or, from the perspective of how his game works. I am concerned by what happened to Oezdemir when Daniel Cormier chased him down.
Yeah.
Because do I think Ilir Latifi can totally replicate that? Yes. Like the fact that he when he lost top position to Cormier, he was basically...
Yeah.
He would have been finished in the first round and was finished in the second. He had zero chance underneath him.
It was no different. It was no different from seeing Cormier like take down Derek Lewis in round 2 and then repeat it in round 3. It was just the same feeling of concluding what was already clearly going to happen, which is not a good look. At light heavyweight, you don't want to be as helpless on the ground as, granted, it's Daniel Cormier on top of you, but this has been a consistent problem. Not just with Oezdemir, but with, the former Black Zillions and current, Combat Club?
Yeah,
all of those hoofed associated guys have had this problem a lot. There's like a team-wide insecurity baked into the brains of every person in that gym, where like the moment that they are in the most... when they're on their back, the position where it feels most like you are being bullied and completely frustrated by your opponent, they tend to break and waste lots of energy, make very bad decisions, or, as kind of looked like the case in that one, and then against Anthony Smith, make no decisions at all. Just sort of cede the fight. And I'm concerned about that too, because Latifi has like no structure, no process whatsoever to his game, but he is going to sort of shuffle around and try to land a gigantic bomb on Oezdemir. He's probably one of the few fighters in this division that like might get the jump on a fighter like Oezdemir in the clinch, not because he's a more technical fighter, and in fact Oezdemir might really pose some problems for him there with the height advantage. But Latifi's so aggressive and so strong, and he uses his build not unlike Daniel Cormier to find those high crotches and the single leg takedowns. So like, there's a really, really good chance that Latifi just loses every minute of this fight until he lands a big shot and or takes Oezdemir down, and then it's a totally different fight.
I mean, I think it's going to be less likely than that than it is that either, because Latifi is really a guy where you have to feel how fast and strong he is. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's really a guy who tends to be dangerous in the first round and then much less so afterwards. I don't think it's necessarily because he has terrible cardio. It's just because he's just incredibly simplistic.
Yeah.
He really is the very, very old fashioned archetype of a big right hand or a takedown.
Mm-hmm.
And a surprisingly good leg kick.
Yes.
Just because he's got Mark Hunt tree trunk legs and can just punt people's legs out from under them.
How wonderful is it, though, that in this division you can get away describing an elite fighter, their striking game, like with those terms. Like normally if we're talking about an elite striker in a division, we're like, oh, he's got this footwork, like really good cutting angles. With Latifi, it's like he's got a good low kick. And he also throws the right hand. So how's that for complexity?
But the thing is that it's just all very dangerous. Mm-hmm. The low kicks clearly really hurt. Yeah. The right hand, he can knock people out, and if you make the mistake of dropping your levels, he can just choke you out a la OSP.
Yeah.
Oezdemir's problem has not, apart from in the Cormier fight, it hasn't been just getting blown out of the water early. And he is pretty tough in his own way.
He was kind of dominating Cormier for the first 2 or 3 minutes of that fight.
Yeah.
So even in that fight, he was not blown out early. It was a comeback where he started to fade as the fight went on.
Yeah. So whilst I genuinely don't trust him to, if he gets taken down, to not just explode in some way, often quite literally, that's often what happens with the Combat Club / Black Zillions guys, is that they tend to just try and surge back to their feet and get rear naked choked. But he is really tough, and like I said, I don't trust Latifi to win rounds. He's just not complex enough. He doesn't have enough going, and he doesn't know how to not sit down with his shots. I mean, part of it is that he's just not physically built that way. He's incredibly stumpy for a light heavyweight, and he doesn't close distance all that fast. Mm-hmm. So, he's not. I mean, it would be nice to see him being more of a combination puncher or, going to the body a bit more. But in the end, he's just, he has to lunge in from the outside. He's just not a great round winner. If he doesn't finish Oezdemir off early, which, as we both intimated, is a significant possibility, I think he probably does pick up a decision down the stretch.
Oezdemir, that is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, I don't know. Latifi he's got the reach and everything. He does use his jab. I think he can keep that range. But man, that neck crank loss to Kelly Anderson on his record.
Yeah.
That kind of shit worries me when you're fighting someone like Latifi. The man loves to crank necks. So, I gotta go with Oezdemir. Latifi's game just isn't functional enough. But, at every moment, especially early on, there's a high chance of him suddenly and drastically transforming the fight. And there are not many other fighters in this division, other than the likes of Daniel Cormier, that I'd rather have on top of me controlling top position less than Ilir Latifi. So he is a comparable threat to Daniel Cormier in that phase. And that is a place where Oezdemir, he's shown those serious weaknesses that with that team, I don't have any faith that they're really going to be permanently ironed out ever. So, all right, those are the top 2 fights. When we come back, one more light heavyweight bout for you. Jimmie Manuwa versus Alexander Rakic. Interesting fight there. And then we're going to get on to the bouts from UFC 238. Again, those are Ricardo Lamas versus Calvin Kattar and Aljamain Sterling versus Pedro Munhoz. after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Jimmie Manuwa, Aleksandar Rakic. Phil, is this the least light heavyweight fight of the of the ones featured at the top of this card?
I mean, it's pretty light heavyweight.
Yeah, I guess you're right. One of these guys is a gigantic athlete who gets knocked out or knocks you out. Aleksandar Rakic, though. Do you have a take on him? Has it evolved at all since his tough fight with Devin Clark?
I really kind of don't. I think I overestimated Rakic, to be honest. I just thought he was further on in his development than he is. I mean, that was a win, and it was a finish, and it was it was still a round one finish, but he did not look good in that fight.
Yeah, I mean, not to toot my own horn here, Phil, although you know I love to. And if I could find someone else to toot it for me, I would, but I'm the only man for the job. I kind of expected Devin Clark to be a bit of a shocking opponent for Rakic. Devin Clark is one of those light heavyweight specials where he's just raw athletic ability. You know, he's really quick and powerful. He just explodes out of the gate and shocks people. And to that point, Rakic had literally never fought a fighter like that. It's possible that hidden here among his many quick finishes on the regional circuit, there's some great athlete who just didn't make it for whatever reason. But in the UFC before Devin Clark, he fought really no really notable names. Most of these are fights in Vienna. He also fought
exceptionally plodding guys.
Yes. And then in the UFC, he fought Francimar Barros and Justin Ledet, who bear no resemblance whatsoever to the kind of athlete or fighter that Devin Clark is. So I thought, going into that expecting it, I didn't think he looked particularly bad. He got hit with some big shots. He was really, really surprised early, but it was a genuinely nice opportunity to see how he responds to that kind of unexpected duress. And, you know, there was no moment in that fight where he got away from his game plan at all. He got knocked down twice in the first 2 minutes, but never got away from what seemed like his game plan, which was jab, maintain distance, land low kicks, and force him to miss. And he was doing that as the round went on. And then he timed Clark coming in while Clark tried to counter one of those leg kicks, which he had already dropped. Rakic doing that once before. Tried to counter one. Rakic hit him with a back fist and dropped him, and that was it. So we didn't see a ton of adjustment out of Rakic, but we didn't see any negative adjustment either. We didn't see him feeling like he had to suddenly improvise because he had an opponent who was, surprising him. So I thought it was all right. You know, it's the kind of performance that you probably need as a developing fighter. And Rakic is still just 27. We've still seen, he sort of reminds me of like a light heavyweight, Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos, where he's got this like really well-rounded, action-oriented style. Hard low kicks, killer top game, perfectly competent wrestling, and competent boxing game as well to go along with it. So I think I'm not too down on him after that performance. I think it was something that needed to happen for him. He needed to have and then survive that experience. But if that athletic ability was a challenge, especially given that Devin Clark, who's not known for his boxing skill, did knock Rakic down with a left hook, a leaping left hook, then Jimmie Manuwa is definitely poised to test the same holes.
Yeah, that is Jimmie Manuwa's punch. It is as we've mentioned before, it is the English guy's punch. and the one that they made their way through the UFC with, that little wave of them that came through the early 2000s. So yeah, so it's interesting. Like the question is like, where is Jimmie Manuwa?
Yeah,
because he's on a, I think, 3-fight losing streak.
Yep.
Of which 2 he got finished in, and he's really been he was someone who came to MMA incredibly late, without any kind of combat sports background, and clearly an incredible natural athlete, but also one who is somewhat falling apart. Like he just picks up a lot of injuries and is surprisingly fragile.
Chin-wise, you mean, or just physically overall?
Yeah, chin-wise. I mean, he looked surprisingly good against Thiago Santos.
Yeah.
I will say that. Like, he survived a war with Santos way more than I thought he was going to.
He looked physically fit for sure.
Yeah, because if he'd been dropped by him, if you told me that he was going to get dropped by him early, I would have just thought, well, that's just fucking it then.
Yeah. His soul lives inside Maheta now. He lives inside the hammer.
Yep. So, and the other thing is that, like, I'm not sure how Rakic looks when he doesn't have it's what you mentioned with the Clark fight. Clark is powerful and quick, but he's not particularly powerful. I mean, he's not particularly big or strong, whereas Munhoz and Ledet were big and strong, but also incredibly slow. Manuwa he's big and powerful, and he's also fairly quick with it. And, you know, what with his tendency to... He's got a very, very tricky tendency. You know, I think Zane has commented on it before to load his... to kind of load his left hip like he's going to throw from his right side, and then just never do it. You know, he tends to just close in, and then he'll come in behind the left hook or like lead left kick.
Yeah,
very much not a right-handed striker at all.
Every once in a while, a sort of light bulb seems to go off for Jimmie Manuwa, where he's like, I've hit this guy with my left leg and left hand 36 times in this round, and he throws an overhand right, and it catches the other guy by surprise almost every time. So there is some utility to it, but he really has to work up the nerve to let that right hand go. For whatever reason, he may honestly be a left-handed fighter who just fights in an orthodox stance.
Yeah, I'm almost sure that he is.
But he's really dependent on that punch and that kick. The thing for Rakic is, like, you know, the imperturbability that he showed against Clark is big. You know, that's something that could definitely net him a win over Jimmie Manuwa. Like, mental and physical durability are both huge the bigger the opponents get. And Jimmie Manuwa is probably, I don't know that his physical durability is, like, it's probably crumbling. He's 39, but it also has just never been all that great, at least not in his UFC career. You know, he lost that fight to Jan Blachowicz, in which twice he was close enough to being knocked out. He was certainly badly wobbled twice. And in all 4 of his other losses, all in the UFC, and granted all to good competition, all the other ones have been knockouts. And so, like, that's something. I can really picture Rakic sort of weathering a storm, staying in this fight, and just picking Manuwa apart. But there are concerns. Like, Jimmie Manuwa, more so than, I mean, Ledet probably should have been in this category, but he's really boxing-centric. So Manuwa, more than anyone else Rakic has fought, should be consistently capable of fighting at kicking range. Like, he is a genuine kicking threat. And a lot of Rakic's striking success is his ability to outkick his bigger, slower opponents and then move his feet to get away before they can catch him with a counterpunch. So that's a concern. I have no idea, really, how Rakic deals with an opponent who can pressure him, who can, you know, when Jimmie is being good, stick to the jab and hammer his body and legs with kicks. You know, like, who knows how he deals with that threat if he has consistent ways of getting past that. I think there's also a chance that Manuwa might stall him out in the clinch, because we have seen him go to that before, especially when he feels somewhat threatened by his opponent's wrestling, or by his opponent's striking, rather. We have seen him just sort of stall people out and also use his own offensive wrestling to take people down and control position. I think Rakic is probably a better grappler than Manoa, but there's room for an experienced for Manoa to put on a sort of experienced, savvy performance here. There's a lot of room for that because, as we saw in that Clark fight with Rakic, like, he can be surprised. He doesn't necessarily have the broadest ability to adjust his approach on the feet. He may, in fact, just, even if things aren't working, like he was getting countered for throwing those low kicks against Clark, and he was able to time those counters and get away, but he did just keep throwing naked low kicks. So, like, a savvier, smoother striker could absolutely take advantage of his imperturbability could also be read as a refusal to adjust. Like, there's always two sides to that coin. So, I'm not really sure who to call here, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm probably going to go for Rakic. I think that the tendency for Manoa to load his hip and to be heavy on his front foot, I think that's probably going to be good for Rakic, as he does really like that.
The low kick.
That low kick. It was one of the reasons why he completely annihilated Ledet so easily, because Ledet was just ready to be like, all right, I'm the bigger guy, I'm a heavyweight, I can do what I've done against heavyweights, I'm just going to stand out over my front foot and jab him when he comes in, and then Rakic just kicked the shit out of his leg.
Yeah.
And Manoa is still a little plodding. I mean, it's an interesting question, because if you're talking about guys who rely on a range kicking game, also you could easily say that both Corey Anderson and OSP are guys like that, and Manoa did actually a pretty good job of just forcing them into the cage and then fucking them up. Rakic's durability, again, something of an open question. I mean, he did finish Clark, but he got rocked a good couple of times going for those low kicks.
Yeah.
But I think I probably trust it more than Manoa's. I mean, Manoa's only decisions in the UFC are both Blachowicz, and he won one and lost one. Everything else, it's either he finished them or he got finished. I don't think he really is a kill or be killed fighter. And yeah, I just think that the heavy front foot, and that Rakic just, I expect him to be able to show more tools. I would be more surprised if Jimmie Manoa suddenly showed up, with a long right hand that he'd specifically learned to take out Rakic's leg kicks.
Oh no, there will be none of that.
I would be shocked by that, but I wouldn't be shocked if Rakic, if we see him with where he suddenly added some new wrinkle into his game. He's added he's really worked on his jab hook change up, or he's hitting reactive doubles now, or something like that, So yeah, I got to pick Rakic, I guess, and I'm not particularly happy about it. This is still a tough matchup for him this early in his career, but yeah, I think I'll probably pick him and probably buy finish as well, just because it is Jimmie Manoa.
Yeah. I might just pick Manoa to make it interesting, because this really does feel like a bit of a coin flip to me. I know there's the momentum is against Manoa. There's all kinds of reasons to think that, obviously Rakic is on the rise and Manoa is headed in the other direction. But given the problems that Rakic did have with the explosiveness of Clark, Manoa offers not so much more. I was going to say so much more depth, but what it really is just it's sort of the opposite of depth, I guess. He's Jimmie Manoa is Jimmie Manoa is like a restaurant that only sells one dish. He's a diner, but it has the best goddamn kebabs in town. You go there, you're going to get this thing done really, really well at a high level, and it's going to be consistently good. And that's Jimmie Manoa. Yep. He doesn't change up. He's not going to have a right hand when this fight rolls around. But unlike Devin Clark, he's not going to get insane and crazy, trying to force openings that aren't there. He is going to feel when that left hook is available to him. He's going to march forward. He's probably going to look to counter when Rakic throws kicks at him. And he may very well mash him against the fence to take that range away and try to wear him out a little bit too. So I think I will take Jimmie Manoa. It's not a great look It's a good look to survive getting dropped by Devin Clark. It wasn't a big shock to me, but it's not a great look to get dropped twice by Devin Clark either. So,
I think both this one and Usman Latifi, I am tremendously uncomfortable with.
Yeah, but that makes them pretty interesting matchups. So, no complaints, really. It's about as good as it gets at light heavyweight. There's some other stuff on this card that's worth your time, but we're not going to talk about any of it because none of it's worth as much time as basically the entirety of UFC 238. Why don't we take one more break, in fact, and when we come back, we are going to talk to you about a couple of bantamweight and featherweight masterpieces of matchmaking. Aljamain Sterling versus Pedro Munhoz and Ricardo Lamas versus Calvin Kattar after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Okay, folks, welcome back. Segment 3, and now we get to the good stuff. Aljamain Sterling, Pedro Munhoz, both of these men, if I am not mistaken, currently riding 3-fight win streaks. Aljamain Sterling had his most recent win over Jimmie Rivera in a chef kiss performance, just a really, really sublime show of boxing ability from a guy who, his whole background and whole style coming up in this organization was the submission grappler guy, the submission wrestler. And he has finally matured into this really well-rounded fighter who seems like a genuinely effective out-fighting boxer. And that was great to see. On the other hand, Pedro Munhoz handed Cody Garbrandt the third TJ Dillashaw loss of his career in his last fight, which was also a tremendously big win. Before that, both of these dudes beat Brett Johns, Munhoz beat Brian Caraway, and Sterling also has a win over Cody Stamann in his 3-fight streak. So, two guys with lots of momentum right now, two guys who have just earned what is arguably for each of them their biggest career win, and who the hell is going to win this fight?
I mean, this is a really hard fight to call, and these guys have both impressed a lot lately. And this is one of the best fights the bantamweight can offer, not just because these are two elite, incredibly skilled, well-rounded, fascinating fighters to watch, but because of the basics of the style matchup itself. Mm-hmm. Because the main question has to be, right, is, does Aljamain Sterling try and take Pedro Munhoz down?
Right. I don't know. I don't know.
Because this is the thing, like, Aljamain Sterling, going back to, with the exception of his fight against Brian Caraway, has handily out-wrestled everyone he has gone to the mat with recently, including, quality grapplers like Stamann. He really, just dominated
Brett Johns.
Jimmie Rivera.
Oh, Rivera too.
And Brett Johns. Yeah, both these guys. The Renan Barão fight is perhaps not, that doesn't mean what it used to. But he was the first person to really put the cracks in Renan Barão's takedown defense. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think Renan Barão had really given up many takedowns at all.
His percentage, statistically, he had even better takedown defense than Jose Aldo.
Yeah.
Hold on. This matchup is so exciting. I need to change my underwear. And as you may have just heard, my laundry is done. So let me go turn that off. Be right back. I was secretly hoping when I'd come back you would have reacted to that sound like a starting gun. Just rapidly begun analyzing.
Sprinted out of my seat. Wait a minute, when you're gone, I'm supposed to be talking shit about you. I never remember this.
You never do that. I know. You're a fucking chump. All right. You were saying, sorry, I cut you off to do the laundry.
What the fuck was I saying?
I don't know. It wasn't interesting.
God damn you. So the question is, so Aljamain Sterling has handily out-grappled pretty much everyone he's fought recently.
Yes. Oh, we were talking about Hennebrau's takedown defense, how he managed to crack that.
Yep. Cracked Hennebrau's takedown defense, cracked his ground game, has looked fairly unbeatable on the ground. Pedro Munhoz has finished fucking everyone who has tried grappling with him.
Yeah. Often very quickly.
Yeah. He is an absolute... With the possible exception of Brian Ortega, he is probably the single best guy at just picking up guillotines and choke submissions on people who try to grapple with him.
Yeah, he's a genuinely good wrestler in his own right, but beyond that, he has the psychological takedown defense that is anyone who puts their head near my hip gets strangled.
So I guess the question is, so this is going to start off on the feet, and both these guys have made a reasonable amount of their recent time on the feet. Like Pedro Munhoz is the classic guy he's the classic example of someone who's just decided to beat you up until you shoot on him. Mm-hmm. He is the kickboxing equivalent of a Diaz brother. And like you said, he is a good wrestler himself, but more than that, I think he has huge confidence in his chin. As, we saw in the fact that he was just like, oh yeah, I knew that if Cody Garbrandt hit me, that would just make him go nuts and he would keep trying to hit me and then I could finish him, as opposed to like a normal human who would rightly come to the conclusion that if Cody Garbrandt hit them, they would be astral traveling.
Yes.
So, and meanwhile, Sterling has developed into this really crafty, irritating range kickboxer. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was sort of foolishly compared to John Jones a lot in his previous career, in his early days, because he was a tall, skinny, black prospect.
Yeah.
And he still doesn't really wrestle much like John Jones, but he has taken the lessons of volume and variety that Jones offered.
Shit, he's a better boxer than Jones. At least he matured. He matured into this level of boxer much faster. Like John Jones has only in the last couple years really showed this sort of like really technical, process-driven, classic textbook boxing stuff that Sterling does. Not that everything is technically textbook, but the process is. In application, the way he uses his jab, the way he feints, the way he ensures to change the position of his head pretty much every time he lands, the way that he exits on angles, everything is correct outfighting practice.
Yep. And and we've seen significant development from him. I think the first time we really saw him as looking like a good striker, not just someone who was burning the clock until they could hit a takedown. It's probably his fight against Augusto Mendes. Mm-hmm. I think the Assunção fight was good, and I think was a useful one, and I think perhaps illustrative here, because it was incredibly close. Mm-hmm. That he was just able to mark Assunção up from range, and with kind of win a significant volume edge over him, and then end up getting... he lost due to a few key right hands, but it was a fight where I think I had Sterling winning on my cards, because I had him winning the only round that he won the only significant round, which was the one in the third. Super
close, and in retrospect, it feels very much like the performance where, like, you can just imagine the conversation afterwards where Ray Longo took Aljamain Sterling back into the locker room immediately and was like, "Hey, if you had thrown your strikes like just slightly more, you would have definitely won that fight." It was that close. And then against Augusto Mendes, it was like his very next fight, we saw him picking someone apart from range. And maybe that Augusto Mendes is perhaps the strongest comparison to this matchup. Because you have like a sort of bullish powerhouse. Mendes is not the level of kickboxer that Pedro Munhoz is, but he's similarly threatening on the ground. And Sterling's reasoning in that kind of matchup was to rely on his reach and his striking, to not test the ground game against a really powerful, finish-oriented submission grappler.
Yeah, I think there's a few useful fights there. I mean, that we can look at, because there's been no one that I think can contest with Sterling in the same kind of 8 points kickboxing style that Munhoz can. The real problem, I think, with Sterling will be dealing with leg kicks and combination punches, because that's what Munhoz is going to want to cut him down with. But I think we have seen Munhoz definitely. I mean, for a bantamweight, he is exceptionally plodding. There is a reason why people compare him to John Lineker.
Yeah.
And we have seen him struggle with both range and speed. And two fights which I think are illustrative of that are the Dodson one, which again was very close, but he did also. I did not think Munhoz won that, but he did just struggle to track Dodson down, and Dodson, frankly, throws a lot less volume than Sterling does. I mean, Dodson didn't hurt him at any point in that fight, but it's notable that he still won a decision. And if John Dodson is winning decisions over you without hurting you, then there might be an issue there.
And the other one, I trust Sterling to do a lot more with the kinds of angles that Dodson was able to find on Munhoz. At this point, absolutely trust him to have the volume and the output.
Yeah. And the other one I think is interesting is going back a bit. It's Justin Scoggins. And Justin Scoggins did Scoggins his way out of that fight, as you might expect him to nowadays. But he kind of was tuning Munhoz up a bit beforehand. And that was very much in just being a long, tall, light-footed kicker that Munhoz was struggling to close in on.
Yeah. My concern for Sterling playing that kind of game plan is there's a couple of things that Munhoz does well. You know, he is a jab magnet. His defense is to crunch. It's very like first Muay Thai class defense. He sort of just crunches up, puts up the guard, and tucks his chin. And Sterling is going to have a field day, I think, sneaking jabs through that guard and creating angles off of those little momentary interruptions. If he can just stick to that kind of approach, he can outmaneuver Munhoz most of the time. Munhoz is, however, perfectly aware of those deficiencies in his game and perfectly willing to work with them. As you said, he really, really believes in his durability. And Pedro Munhoz is not the kind of guy you're going to stick on the jab and then, like Jimmie Rivera, he's going to become frustrated and keep looking for the perfect and then more perfect and then more perfect opportunity to hit you with the ideal punch. You know, he is going to exchange whenever he can. And when you hit Pedro Munhoz, that is a trigger for him to finish the exchange. He tries to have the last word. And that's something I could be worried about for Aljamain Sterling. The way he moves his head, he does tend to get out of position. The fact that he stays moving and has lots of options in mind, you know, lots of bridges to cross from whatever position he winds up in, that's good. But he still winds up in a lot of compromised positions. That an opponent who simply keeps the exchange going, who keeps adding to the combination of counters, is probably going to be able to find him. And then definitely, as you said, the low kicks. Having that viable weapon from range, but also as something to punish boxing defenses. Anytime somebody turns their shoulder, turns away and slips under a punch, plants their feet to move their head, you can just thwack them really, really hard in the leg. The other thing, too, and I think this is worth saying, we don't know how willing Sterling is going to be to grapple with Munhoz, but Munhoz will absolutely eat a shot to get to the clinch, to land knees and elbows, and he can be pretty damaging in that range as well. It's really his willingness to plant his feet and make the most of whatever opportunities he gets in range. You know, they may be particularly sparing opportunities against a guy like Sterling, but it's also not hard for me to imagine, like, I don't know, Sterling taking some hard shots and not really being able to take it as well as a, you know, I don't know. I still don't. Is that just me like holding on to past failures too much? Like, I don't think Aljamain Sterling is the most durable dude in this division mentally or physically. And I think if the fight gets really ugly, you know, I've seen him knocked out before. I saw him wilt against Brian Caraway. I've seen enough performances out of Sterling to think that Munhoz has a serious comeback chance in this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, Munhoz is one of those rare Lineker-esque guys who is just completely, you cannot convince him to be scared of you.
Oh, no.
It is impossible.
You can only make him mad.
Yeah, I mean, his debut in the UFC was against Rafael fucking Assunção.
And he competed.
And, yeah, I mean, he competed just by coming forward the whole time and absolutely refusing to go away whilst Assunção beat the living shit out of him. I mean, he managed to just walk through Assunção's shots to get to him. So, yeah, he's a much more defined pressure fighter than anyone, really, that Sterling has beaten in this recent run, which is a significant concern.
Or ever, you know?
Yeah. But I do think, just the fact that I expect Sterling to be able to build up a lead, the fact that I expect him to be able to survive if it does hit the ground, like, again, I've never seen anyone come really particularly close to submitting Sterling. I mean, admittedly, Munhoz is, he is a different breed of grappler, but Sterling is a very, very good grappler. He is one of those guys who is not merely he's not just an excellent wrestler, but he's someone who is internalized and fit incredibly well with submission grappling as well.
Yeah.
Like, if he does go to the ground for whatever reason, if Munhoz sells out in the clinch and manages to get him down, or if he, panics himself into going for a takedown on Munhoz, I think he is perhaps the guy in this division, with the possible exception of, I would say maybe TJ Dillashaw, that I would expect to be able to wrestle, grapple, and survive with Munhoz. So I think I probably do like him. I think I came in very unsure who I was going to pick, but I think, and just given the fact that Munhoz has tended to have to come back in a lot of his fights, I mean, it's partially it's the fact that he's just a relentless pressure machine that breaks people down, but it's also just, there were a lot of those fights where he had to force his way back into the fight. He had to force something crazy out the opponent. And in a fight against a determined, disciplined opponent in Dodson, he really couldn't change it up with any more mental pressure. He couldn't, he could only do the same thing. He couldn't really change it up in any significant way. So I think we've seen much more discipline out of Sterling. I think if he gets out on a lead, I think he can stick on it.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree. Like, my major concern here is that, Munhoz doesn't really adjust. Like, it's only the intensity increases, but his tactical choices don't really change. He really sticks to his guns. But it still does feel like a matchup where, just by nature of Munhoz's self-belief and the pressuring style that is probably, connected to that personality trait, that there are still the feeling of some no-go zones for Aljamain Sterling in this fight. Some phases where it's probably best not to spend time. Probably best not to tie up in the clinch, at least not in every kind of conceivable position. Probably best at least not to go for shot takedowns on a guy like Munhoz, who always has that guillotine just ready to pull the trigger. And it doesn't feel like that for Munhoz. Like, I just think he's just going to keep marching forward. Like his version of
I would say Munhoz's no-go zone is definitely Aljamain Sterling's kicking range.
Well, I was going to say it's his no-go zone, but he's never going to stay in that zone anyway. He's always going to be progressing through it.
I think he can avoid it less effectively than Sterling can avoid, say, hitting shot takedowns on him.
Yeah.
He's definitely going to have to walk through a lot of jabs and kicks.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that Sterling has shown a real strong ability to use his reach in combination with his footwork. That makes me think that he is going to be able to control this fight right from the get-go. And we've seen enough. It may still be a lot of like rote defensive reactions, but we have seen his ability to get his shots in and then either move his feet or his head, or frequently these days both, to reset and just rinse and repeat. And I do think he can do that for 3 rounds. Munhoz's intensity increases, but he still doesn't really close the distance all that well. He still doesn't really cut angles or even cut off the cage all that well. So
yeah. Oh yeah, the one fight we obviously didn't mention, their mutual bouts with Jimmie Rivera.
Mm-hmm.
So that was again, another one where I think Munhoz just struggled to track him down, and like Assunção, he fed a lot of counters to Rivera. And whilst Rivera did kind of fade towards the end, I mean, the difference between his fight, I mean, even on the feet, Sterling kind of beat Rivera pretty handily.
He absolutely did.
Yeah, admittedly, I think he scared him a lot with the takedown, but it was the fact that it wasn't like it was fairly one-sided for Rivera until he got tired, but it was completely one-sided for Sterling when he fought Rivera. So, yeah, I mean, I think, against stocky planted fighters, I think maybe he's just figured that style out.
Yeah, I think he's got the build and the style to make it work. And I think that's probably all we have time to cover on this episode, my man. I know we talked about doing Lamas versus Kattar, and in fact, I teased it what feels like a dozen times, but we're out of time. So when we come back next week, we will be talking to you about, and make sure you write all this down, Henry Cejudo, Marlon Moraes, Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica Ai, Tony Ferguson versus Donald Cerrone, Jimmie Rivera versus Peter Yan, Tatiana Suarez versus Nina Ansarov, and then Ricardo Lamas versus Calvin Kattar. There's also Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus Alexa Grasso on this card. There's Yan Xiaonan versus Angela Hill. There's, I don't know how much you care about Caitlin Chukagian and Joanne Calderwood, but that should be a fun fight. And Bevon Lewis, guy who beat the absolute ass off of Uriah Hall before getting suddenly knocked out. He's back, and he's fighting Darren Stewart on the Fight Pass prelims. So, again, this card rules. If we do not have time to cover all of that in next week's episode, then we will do so on a bonus episode, because there's too much good stuff here not to cover almost all of it. So until next week, Phil, do we have anything to plug a week in advance?
I mean, I'll be doing a preview for the weirdest, gangliest light heavyweight fight in recent memory between Smith and Gus.
Lovely. So make sure you check out Phil's toe-to-toe preview with Dave Castillo, and I got no idea what's coming out of me next week, but there will be UFC 238 articles, and more than one of them, so keep your eyes open for that. You can find all of that stuff on bloodyelbow.com, and you can find both Phil and myself on social media. On Twitter, Phil can be found at the handle @EvilGregJackson, and me at BoxingBush with a BUSCH. Make sure you check out our Patreon for the aforementioned bonus episodes, and by the time you hear this, there should have been another boxing commentary video posted as well. So enjoy the light heavyweights, and join us in anticipating UFC 238. We'll be back next week to talk to you about all of that. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you all came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.